ever found yourself welling up and pretty much on the edge of those tears escaping and rolling down your cheeks from what appear to be very irrational triggers? And potentially you're in quite an inconvenient place to start sobbing, like a work meeting or a work Zoom call, or even in a social place with people you don't know that well. But something has triggered this sort of cascade of emotion that's about to escape as tears. And guess what? It's a bit of a vicious cycle, because you feel stupid that you're about to cry or that you are beginning to cry. And because you feel stupid, you feel even worse. You're beating yourself up, and that makes you want to cry even more. Phew, don't panic. This is an upbeat episode because we're going to really put crying on the forensics table, explore it. What's really going on? There's a lot of science behind this, and I think the more we understand what triggers those tears, the nicer we can be to ourselves, and potentially the less we'll cry. But is there even anything wrong with crying? Stay listening. I'm Trisha Lewis, the host of Self-Belief Unsquashed. What a great word that is, unsquashed. Really, we look at all the stuff that I say squashes us. And I talk about self-squashing because basically we're doing it to ourselves. And that involves all sorts of things to do with very human stuff, revolving around fears, illusions, baggage, you name it. So let's have a look at something that I suspect most of us will be familiar with, and that is crying. Now, you might be suppressing tears. You might be thinking you're crying too much. But wouldn't it be useful to understand a bit more about the mechanics of it, the psychology of it, and how you can kind of embrace the whole crying thing in a healthier way that doesn't result in those self-squashing, vicious cycles? So we're going to look at the mystery, in a way, of why we cry, because most of us just think of it as this water coming out of our eyes. But of course, there's some science behind it, because that's how humans operate: brain, body, etc. Do some people cry more than others? And if so, is there a reason for that? Does it have a benefit, or is it a negative thing? In other words, should we suppress, should we release, or both? Look, if you've ever felt embarrassed by tearing up, or thought, why can't I control this? You're definitely not alone. And in fact, let's just start with a sharing story. It wasn't that long ago. I was at the climbing wall because my latest hobby is climbing, and I'm quite new to it compared to my partner, who's been doing it for decades, but he's incredibly supportive. And I'm learning, and I'm making huge steps forward over a couple of years. But as with some other situations in my world, I sometimes beat myself up and get this really down feeling if I can't do something. And this happened at the climbing wall. I'd tried a really, really hard route and couldn't do it. Or I think actually I got to the top, but with about 20 rests moments on the rope. So I didn't feel as if I'd done a good job. And I came down, and I immediately, my partner, by the way, was saying very supportive things, but I immediately felt, without any rational thought really going on at this point, I just felt this welling up surge thing happening, which I know, because I can feel the prickling in my eyes, is the preliminary step to tears. And they can come very quickly. And I'm in the middle of a climbing wall with lots of lovely people, nice music, fun things going on. And I now feel ridiculous. It doesn't matter that I couldn't do that in one go. It was a really hard route. Why am I being so odd about this? Oh my God, I'm so useless. Look at me feeling useless, etc. That is a vicious cycle. Now, I would like to say at this point that I've done a lot of work on this, and I breathed through it, and I didn't suppress it in so much as I kept it to myself and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But I did stop the tears from overflowing and coming down my cheeks and me being a useless mess on the ground. No, I expressed how I was feeling really quickly to my lovely supportive partner. And that actually is something I've learned to do, because then you start to get a little bit more real world sense about what's going on. It becomes a bit more logical and you're not lost in this quagmire of emotion, but equally, you're not denying these odd feelings that you're having. So before we go any further, there's a little tip. But let's delve into this a little bit more scientifically, shall we? Well, with my professor's hat on, I will tell you there are 3 types of crying. You might well know this. They are known as reflexive or reflex. Then the other one is basal, or sometimes called continuous, which is what it says on the tin. And the other one is emotional, which is what we've just been talking about. So just to put those into context, reflex, well, you're in the kitchen chopping up onions. That's your reflex crying. Unless you're actually really, really emotionally involved with these onions and feeling sorry for them. No, this is just a physical thing. We don't need the science behind all that for the moment. Basal or continuous is actually what we're doing the entire time in our eyes. It keeps them lubricated and gets rid of all the little bits of dirt. And we do it every time we blink. We're creating that sort of fluid. But this is the interesting one, and this is what this episode is about: emotional. That isn't so obvious. You're still resulting in the same fluid coming out of your eyes, but what has triggered it? Tears are not automatically made by the body when they are emotional tears, crying. It's something that has to be triggered in the limbic system, and it sends a message to your brain and releases this fluid. And basically, your tear ducts quite simply can't cope with the quantity, so they overflow. It's a flood. Now, interestingly, emotions are like floods sometimes, aren't they? And what I was describing in that first story very much was a flooding situation. And just a little sidetrack here, because it's a great visualization. My partner said, with you, Tricia, it's a little bit like the Titanic. Once the water gets through over one bulkhead, it just keeps going over the next, over the next, over the next. And he's quite right. Now, I've got better at putting a barrier up and stopping that flow from sinking me. Let's not go any further with the Titanic, but you know what I mean. But that is kind of what happens. And there is a lot of theory about your amygdala, which is the emotional response bit in your brain, and the other bits of your brain responsible for emotional regulation. So you've got the response, you've got the regulation. And there is a lot of research that suggests that the female brain, the way it's wired, means that there's a closer link between those regions. So there's less time for the regulation to kick in, if you like. And there's also a theory that testosterone in a man is partly an inhibiting effect on that process. So the regulation thing is quicker to kick in. So the flooding thing doesn't happen so easily. And I hope to goodness that some of that makes sense. It's interesting to know, though, because the more we put this on the forensics table, the less you'll beat yourself up when you have these what appear to be emotional flooding situations where you just feel a bit daft, or you're desperately trying to suppress, which can be quite unhealthy. And you can find yourself then suddenly letting it all out in a lot of sobbing, and often that translates as anger, and you're rushing out of rooms and slamming doors, etc., or being very rude to somebody on your Zoom call at work, which is not advisable. Anger is very quick to kick in when you're in that heightened emotional state. And if you're suppressing this, what might seem irrational, but something is going on, urge to cry, then you could be in that danger zone. Anyway, let's dig a little deeper. What makes us cry? I mean, music is an absolute classic, isn't it? But we don't all get triggered by the same music. My husband isn't a big crier. He's very lovely and sensitive and full of empathy and all sorts, but he will just automatically have these tears coming down his face at certain pieces of music. And I don't always understand why that bit of music has triggered that response. But then equally, I'll have a response to other kinds of music that don't do that to him. So it is quite an individual thing. But music generally has definitely got that power, hasn't it? But I think we don't beat ourselves up about that, because I think we get it. And I think other people get it too. The same with films. I remember once sitting in an Odeon cinema years and years ago with my lovely, full of empathy, very sensitive and emotionally wonderfully rich daughter. And she was in her late teens, and we were watching Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. And I suddenly became aware of the whole row of seats shaking. She was sobbing her eyes out. She won't mind me telling you this. And yeah, there was a lot of sadness in this film, but it had really triggered something in her, and there was no stopping this cascade. Different films will affect us differently as individuals. Speeches, listening to a speech when it's fully charged with emotion can suddenly, oh, that's it, the prickling happens, we're crying. And it might not be something immediately pertaining to us. It's just something that we're feeling that's almost like a contagious thing from the person giving the speech. Certainly, if we hear somebody's voice cracking as they're giving a speech with emotion, if we've got any empathy at all, it's not that surprising that we mirror that emotion. A lot of this is to do with empathy, isn't it? And there's nothing wrong with empathy. So just recognize the fact that part of this crying thing is just reminding you that you're a wonderful, real human being, of course. But we still need to dig a bit further, because it can be annoying. It can be confusing. Are you a big softie in your mind? Or are other people more stoic? And do you compare yourself and think, why can't I be more like that? It goes without saying that there will be individual differences. There will be differences because of the way we were brought up, our environment, nature, nurture, etc., cultural differences and gender differences. Yes, there is pretty sound research on the fact that women do cry more than men, and we mentioned that earlier. But what about the messages that we're given in society? Girls are meant to cry, big boys don't cry. Girls are sweet and lovely when they're all vulnerable, and they're there. And boys, man up, or whatever other horrible expressions get given. But what I really want to get to is, should we worry about releasing these tears when these slightly irrational situations occur, or is it a good thing too? There are some benefits of crying. You can think of crying as a detox, because actually stuff, very scientific, does get flushed out in those tears. So that's quite a positive outlook on tears, I think. What about social bonding? It is probably in our wiring, this crying thing, from a long, long time ago, before language. And babies do it before they have language, as a non-verbal form of connection, of saying, I need you, I need some help here. So it's pretty natural. The release effect is a term used, and I don't really have to explain that. You can understand, like I said, it's a bit of a pressure cooker if you try and suppress, because like I said, this trigger is happening without you consciously making it happen. So it's an instant ding, 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 tears come out, they fall. So if you're instantly and always trying to stop that happening, that doesn't feel very healthy. The explosions are more likely. Better to have some gentle, quiet, not too long lasting crying sessions than massive sobbing in fits for, a day and giving yourself a massive headache and all sorts of other things, and potentially, as I say, getting angry and taking it out on the wrong people, embarrassing yourself at work, etc. That's not what you want. So listening to those automatic moments when that response happens and going with it surely could be a good thing. The release effect. I'll put a couple of links around here on some of these theories and bits of research. All I'm really trying to do here is, as I said at the beginning, put crying on the forensics table, explore it more, make it less mysterious, and therefore, hopefully, create a better relationship with it so you don't beat yourself up about it, so that you understand it more and realize that when those seemingly ridiculous situations of crying happen, like me at the climbing wall, they are a great opportunity to just go down a couple of layers and think, actually, what is going on here? Why do I have that reaction? And you can apply that to the moments that you now, with this extra self-awareness, perhaps, spot and think, what is actually going on here? Because that doesn't really justify me having this response. Now, don't try and analyze it if you've burst out into tears because of a schmaltzy John Lewis Christmas ad, or a song or any of those things, because that's, to me, pretty bog standard. But it's the occasions where this welling up happens. You can feel the prickling. Those tears are going to come. You're in a potentially slightly inconvenient place, and you feel awful because this is happening. And then you beat yourself up, then you feel utterly useless, and then you feel like crying more. So it's those situations that the more forensic you can be, the more self-aware you can be, and then going away potentially to think about why. Is there a layer here that goes back away? Is this a bit of baggage? Is this a message that I'm giving myself that I could slightly reframe, etc.? That's the action tip, basically. As always, self-awareness is a great unsquasher. Time to feel empowered rather than embarrassed by your tears. I think we should also end on a very positive note and talk about the kind of crying that is emotional crying that happens when we just feel a surge of something beautiful. This happened very recently to me when I was listening to a song, and it's You to Me Are Everything, classic 70s song, and that's the time of my highest emotions, a song by The Real Thing. And it's got beautiful surging music, but the lyrics go something like this. I would take the stars out of the sky for you. Stop the rain from falling if you ask me to. I'll do anything for you. Your wish is my command. I could move a mountain when your hand is in my hand. Ooh, words cannot express how much you mean to me. And I won't give you any more of it. Play it. See if it makes you cry. Why did it make me cry? Because after a very interesting life story, am with a very, very lovely man. And that's how I feel about him. And so those tears came because my amygdala in my brain, attached to all the other neurotransmitters, said, oh, this is just something very lovely, and stuff that happened before was very maybe not lovely. And yeah, life, it's emotions, isn't it? We'd be very odd if we didn't have them. On that note, stay curious and unsquashed. Till the next time. I'm rather hoping you'll stay on this unsquashing journey with me. So let's connect. Go over to trishalewis.com, and on the resources page, you'll not only find a self-squashing quiz, but links to all the other resources and some extras. So do that. Connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and I'd love you to follow my writing on Medium. And I'll put all the links to those around this podcast. Look forward to the next episode. Stay curious and unsquashed.